أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today's second questions are: how are you? How was your weekend? How far in advance have you planned for your end visions or vision? How are you? And no, that should not be how are you, it should be who are you. It's the same letters rearranged differently. Who are you and who do you want to be? What is the difference between a fad and a good goal? So who are you and who should you be and why? This is very different than the kind of questions I usually ask, but it has some similarities too. So these are the questions to think about and to reflect on as we go to the next few things. So remember the transformation process. We are sort of kind of like in between 2 and 3 right now. When I'm talking about who you are, kind of having you evaluate, this is sort of kind of evaluating where you are right now, right? And what are some things that might be important to you, for example, in terms of motivation. And we talked about motivation having these things right here. And having meaning and purpose behind things can actually define who we are. We can make it more concrete. So if you don't have a purpose, if you're just sort of like, you're just kind of planning one day at a time and you're just kind of being taken wherever you're being taken, then it may not be as effective, as compared to if you have a purpose, you have a longing for something, you're kind of craving something, and your entire life is sort of streamlined with that focus that you have, right? So if you know exactly what you want to do in life, and then you kind of like just make the decisions that are relative to that, but you don't make any other decisions and stuff like that, right? And that makes it a lot easier for you to continuously move forward in a very effective way and efficient way. But if you don't have that bigger drive, bigger end goal in life, right, or that purpose, what you're trying to do in life, right, then in that case, you're going to constantly be confused. You're going to try to figure out what I should do, what I should be, like what I should be, and so on. Be like a constant battle, a struggle that you're going through. So something to keep in mind. And then you can get really demotivated, and you can see over here, the purpose is one of the subcomponents of motivation, or one of the parts of motivation. If you don't have a purpose, you're going to lose motivation. Now with that, let us do our brain games. Somebody pick one.
Can we do a personality one?
This one? Okay. Yeah. One. It goes into personality test. Now, again, this is talking about conformity versus non-conformity in general, right? So keep that in mind as we watch this video. So a lot of people, they like to conform themselves according to certain personality types and so on. But this is kind of going over into a little bit more details about some of the flaws and stuff like that.
In 1942, a mother-daughter duo, Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, developed a questionnaire that classified people's personalities into 16 types. Called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, it would go on to become one of the world's most widely used personality tests. Today, personality testing is a multi-billion-dollar industry used by individuals, schools, and companies. But none of these tests, including the MBTI, the Big Five, the DISC assessment, the process communication model, and the Enneagram, actually reveal truths about personality. In fact, it's up for debate whether personality is a stable, measurable feature of an individual at all. Part of the problem is the way the tests are constructed. Each is based on a different set of metrics to define personality. The Myers-Briggs, for instance, focuses on features like introversion and extroversion to classify people into personality types, while the Big Five scores participants on 5 different traits. Most are self-reported, meaning the results are based on questions participants answer about themselves. So it's easy to lie, but even with the best intentions, objective self-evaluation is tricky. Take this question from the Big Five. How would you rate the accuracy of the statement, "I am always prepared"? There's a clear favourable answer here, which makes it difficult to be objective. People subconsciously aim to please. When asked to agree or disagree, we show a bias towards answering however we believe the person or institution asking the question wants us to answer. Here's another question. What do you value more, justice or fairness?
Now notice over here the previous question, am I always prepared, right? This question can actually also have a different aspect, which is that a person who's like, maybe who has symptoms of OCD, for example, may actually feel that they're not actually prepared, even though they might be more prepared than pretty much everyone else. So there is that subjectiveness that comes in.
What about harmony or forgiveness? You may well value both sides of each pair, but the MBTI would force you to choose one. And while it's tempting to assume the results of that forced choice must somehow reveal a true preference, they don't. When faced with the same forced choice question multiple times, the same person will sometimes change their answer. Given these design flaws, it's no surprise that test results can be inconsistent. One study found that nearly half of people who take the Myers-Briggs a second time only 5 weeks after the first get assigned a different type. And other studies on Myers-Briggs have found that people with very similar scores end up being placed in different categories, suggesting that the strict divisions between personality types don't reflect real-life nuances. Complicating matters further, the definitions of personality traits are constantly shifting. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who popularized the terms introvert and extrovert, defined an introvert as someone who sticks to their principles regardless of situation, and an extrovert as someone who molds themselves according to circumstance. Introversion later came to mean shyness, while an extrovert was someone outgoing. Today, an introvert is someone who finds alone time restorative, an extrovert draws energy from social interaction, and an ambivert falls somewhere between these two extremes. The notion of an innate, unchanging personality forms the basis of all of these tests. But research increasingly suggests that personality shifts during key periods, like our school years or when we start working. Though certain features of a person's behavior may remain relatively stable over time, others are malleable, molded by our upbringing, life experiences, and age. All of this matters more or less depending on how a personality test is used. Though anyone using them should take the results with a grain of salt, there isn't much harm in individual use, and users may even learn some new terms and concepts in the process. But the use of personality tests extends far beyond self-discovery. Schools use them to advise students what to study and what jobs to pursue. Companies use them to decide who to hire and for what positions. Yet the results don't predict how a person will perform in a specific role. So by using personality tests this way, institutions can deprive people of opportunities they'd excel at, or discourage them from considering certain paths.
I don't care how many demons he's fought, how many...
Okay, thoughts on this one?
I like how she wrapped it up at the end, that we can change.
Yep.
Basically, like it, as you age or life experiences can change your personality.
Yeah, yeah. And this is very important because, you know, a lot of times people still continue to have the fixed mindset thing. And if you notice over here, we talked about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, right? So the fixed versus fluid mindset. I'm using fluid over here, but the growth mindset is what Dr. Carol Dweck was using. So yeah, the idea that like we can actually adapt and change and, you know, grow and be different than the boxes that we sometimes cage ourselves in, the boundaries or the that we set for ourselves that don't need to be there, and we think that we're doing something good. So this is again the idea of fad, right? Like kind of like trying to conform. But in this case, what if we are, the reality actually shows that that we are malleable. In fact, the prophets, the companions of the Prophet, they were certain kind of people before, and then they molded into great people afterwards and stuff. And their personalities oftentimes changed and stuff. They became different kinds of people oftentimes, just because of the fact that they got new rules to kind of adapt, adapt to live according to. Yeah, personality. This is one thing that I was really advocating like for a long time, but everyone seemed to like just disagree with me and stuff. But I just held my ground and said no. This is we have historical evidence and stuff like that. This is the case. So and remember we talked about IQ test, and we showed another video on IQ test, the dark history of IQ test, and in there they were mentioning something similar about how IQ tests were being used in the late 1800s and throughout the 1900s, and how studies started to disprove the concept of fixed individualism or fixed personalities or mindsets and things like that. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, if not, then go ahead and pick another one.
Oh, real quick, I was just gonna say that I think the emphasis on personality tests, like culturally, is so interesting because I feel like that's a generally more recent thing I want to say. And like the point of personality in and of itself being dynamic, I think is really important. Of course, like your age can impact it, and how you're just doing in like your like different stages of life, I think can also impact it. And I do wonder like to what extent people are kind of have this boxed in mindset about who they can and can't be because they feel they've been socially labeled a certain way, and how that affects someone's self-perception too. Like I know I really identify as an extrovert mostly because anytime I took any single test ever, which I know like there's very little scientific basis to them, like anytime I've taken any of those, I always got like 100% extrovert and 0% introvert, like since I was quite young. And I always found that like funny, like that I felt like, oh, like have I just not changed, or like is that what I actually am, or does this mean that I can't restore from time by myself ever? Like, I do ask myself those things sometimes, and I wonder how much of that is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because now I do feel like I don't heal from any time by myself. I really do feel energized by time with others. And I wonder how much of that is like because I actually am that way, or how much of that is because I believe I have to be that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So pretty much you going backwards and saying, okay, this is the box that I want to be put in, so let me conform to the box's parameters. A box here meaning extrovert. So sometimes that could happen, yeah. And sometimes you might start acting in a certain way just because you're expected to act a certain way. And also the idea of context can shape your personality as well. So yeah, a few things that you mentioned, just wanted to make some quick points on that. Okay, which one should we pick next?
The who am I one.
What an intriguing group of individuals you are. To a psychologist. I've had the opportunity over the last couple of days of listening in on some of your conversations and watching you interact with each other. And I think it's fair to say already that there are 47 people in this audience at this moment displaying psychological symptoms I would like to discuss today. And I thought you might like to know who you are. But instead of pointing at you, which would be gratuitous and intrusive, I thought I would tell you a few facts and stories in which you may catch a glimpse of yourself I'm in the field of research known as personality psychology, which is part of a larger personality science, which spans the full spectrum from neurons to narratives. And what we try to do in our own way is to make sense of how each of us, each of you, is in certain respects like all other people, like some other people, and like no other person. Now, already you may be saying of yourself, I'm not intriguing. I am the 46th most boring person in the Western Hemisphere. Or you may say of yourself, I am intriguing, even if I am regarded by most people as a great thundering twit. But it is your self-diagnosed boringness and your inherent twittiness that makes me as a psychologist really fascinated by you. So let me explain why this is so. One of the most influential approaches in personality science is known as trait psychology, and it aligns you along 5 dimensions, which are normally distributed, that describe universally held aspects of difference between people. They spell out the acronym OCEAN. So O stands for open to experience versus those who are more closed. C stands for conscientiousness, in contrast to those with a more lackadaisical approach to life. E, extroversion, in contrast to more introverted people. A, agreeable individuals, in contrast to those decidedly not agreeable. And N, neurotic individuals, in contrast to those who are more stable. All of these dimensions have implications for our well-being, for how our life goes. And so we know that, for example, openness and conscientiousness are very good predictors of life success, but the open people achieve that success through being audacious and occasionally odd. The conscientious people achieve it through sticking to deadlines, to persevering, as well as having some passion. Extroversion and agreeableness are both conducive to working well with people. Extroverts, for example, I find intriguing. With my classes, I sometimes give them a basic fact that might be revealing with respect to their personality. I tell them that it is virtually impossible for adults to lick the outside of their own elbow. Did you know that? Already, some of you have tried to lick the outside of your own elbow, but extroverts amongst you are probably those who have not only tried, but they have successfully licked the elbow of the person sitting next to them. Those are the extroverts. Let me deal in a bit more detail with extroversion because it's consequential and it's intriguing, and it helps us understand what I call our 3 natures. First, our biogenic nature, our neurophysiology. Second, our sociogenic or second nature, which has to do with the cultural and social aspects of our lives. And third, what makes you individually you, idiosyncratic, what I call your idiogenic nature. Let me explain. One of the things that characterizes extroverts is they need stimulation. And that stimulation can be achieved by finding things that are exciting. Loud noises, parties, and social events here at TED. You see the extroverts forming a magnetic core, and they all gather together, and I've seen you. The introverts are more likely to spend time in the quiet spaces up on the 2nd floor, where they are able to reduce stimulation, and may be misconstrued as being antisocial, but you're not necessarily antisocial. It may be that you simply realize that you do better when you have a chance to lower that level of stimulation. Sometimes it's an internal stimulant from your body. Caffeine, for example, works much better with extroverts than it does introverts. When extroverts come into the office at 9 o'clock in the morning and say, I really need a cup of coffee, they're not kidding. They really do. Introverts do not do as well, particularly if the tasks they're engaged in, and they've had some coffee, if those tasks are speeded and if they're quantitative, introverts may give the appearance of not being particularly quantitative, but it's a misconstrual. And so here are the consequences that are really quite intriguing. We're not always what we seem to be, and that takes me to my next point. I should say, before getting to this, something about sexual intercourse. Although I may not have time, and so if you would like me to, yes, you would? Okay. There are studies done on the frequency with which individuals engage in the conjugal act, as broken down by male, female, introvert, extrovert. So I ask you, how many times per minute? Oh, I'm sorry, that was a rat study. How many times per month do introverted men engage in the act? 3.0. Extroverted men, more or less? Yes, more. 5.5, almost twice as much. Introverted women, 3.1. Extroverted women, frankly, speaking as an introverted male, which I will explain later, they are heroic. 7.5. They not only handle all the male extroverts, they pick up a few introverts as well. We communicate differently, extroverts and introverts. Extroverts, when they interact, want to have lots of social encounter punctuated by closeness. They like to stand close for comfortable communication. They like to have a lot of eye contact or mutual gaze. We found in some research that they use more diminutive terms when they meet somebody. So when an extrovert meets Charles, it rapidly becomes Charlie, and then Chuck, and then Chuckles baby. Whereas for introverts, it remains Charles until he is given a pass to be more intimate by the person he's talking to. We speak differently. Extroverts prefer black and white, concrete, simple language. Introverts prefer, and I must again tell you that I am as extreme an introvert as you could possibly imagine. We speak differently. We prefer contextually complex, contingent, weasel word sentences, more or less, as it were, not to find a point upon it, like that. When we talk, we sometimes talk past each other. I had a consulting contract I shared with a colleague who is as different from me as two people can possibly be. First, his name is Tom. Mine isn't. Secondly, he's 6'5". I have a tendency not to be. And thirdly, he's as extroverted a person as you could find. I am seriously introverted. I overload so much I can't even have a cup of coffee after 3 in the afternoon and expect to sleep in the evening. We had seconded to this project a fellow called Michael. And Michael almost brought the project to a crashing halt. So the person who seconded him asked Tom and me, what do you make of Michael? Well, I'll tell you what Tom said in a minute. He spoke in classic extrovertese. And here is how extroverted ears heard what I said, which is actually pretty accurate. I said, well, Michael does have a tendency at times of behaving in a way that some of us might see as perhaps more assertive than is normally called for. Tom rolled his eyes and he said, Brian, that's what I said. He's an asshole. Now, as an introvert, I might gently allude to certain assholic qualities in this man's behavior, but I'm not going to lunge for the A word. And the extrovert says, he walks like one, he talks like one, I call him one, and we go past each other. Now, is this something that we should be heedful of? Of course, it's important that we know this. Is that all we are? Are we just a bunch of traits? No, we're not. Remember, you're like some other people and like no other person. How about that idiosyncratic you? As Elizabeth or as George, you may share your extroversion or your neuroticism. But are there some distinctively Elizabethan features of your behavior or Georgian of yours that makes us understand you better than just a bunch of traits that make us love you? Not just because you're a certain type of person. I'm uncomfortable putting people in pigeonholes. I don't even think pigeons belong in pigeonholes. So what is it that makes us different? It's the doings that we have in our life, the personal projects. You have a personal project right now, but nobody may know it here. It relates to your kid. You've been back 3 times to the hospital and they still don't know what's wrong. Or it could be your mom. And you've been acting out of character. These are free traits. You're very agreeable, but you act disagreeably in order to break down those barriers of administrative torpor in the hospital to get something for your mom or your child. What are these free traits? They're where we enact a script in order to advance a core project in our lives. And they are what matters. Don't ask people what type you are. Ask them, what are your core projects in your life? And we enact those free traits. I'm an introvert, but I have a core project, which is, yes, I'm a professor. And I adore my students. And I adore my field. And I can't wait to tell them about what's new, what's exciting, what I can't wait to tell them about. And so I act in an extroverted way because at 8 in the morning, the students need a little bit of humor, a little bit of engagement to keep them going in arduous days of study. But we need to be very careful when we act protractedly out of character. Sometimes we may find that we don't take care of ourselves. I find, for example, after a period of pseudo-extroverted behavior, I need to repair somewhere on my own. As Susan Cain said in her Quiet book, in a chapter that featured the strange Canadian professor who was teaching at the time at Harvard, I sometimes go to the men's room to escape the slings and arrows of outrageous extroverts. I remember one particular day when I was retired to a cubicle trying to avoid overstimulation. And a real extrovert came in beside me, not right in my cubicle, but in the next cubicle over. And I could hear various evacuatory noises, which we hate, even our own. That's why we flush during as well as after. And then I heard this gravelly voice saying, "Hey, is that Dr. Little?" If anything is guaranteed to constipate an introvert for 6 months, is talking on the John. That's where I'm going now. Don't follow me. Thank you.
All right, thoughts on this one? Okay, if there's no comments on this one, we'll just go ahead and go this one, inshallah.
real you? This might seem to you like a very odd question because, you know, you might ask, how do we find the real you? How do you know what the real you is, and so forth? But the idea that there must be a real you, surely that's obvious. If there's anything real in the world, it's you. Well, I'm not quite sure. At least we have to understand a bit better what that means. Now, certainly I think that there are lots of things in our culture around us which sort of reinforce the idea that for each one of us, we have a kind of a core, an essence. There's something about what it means to be you, which defines you, and it's kind of permanent and unchanging. The most kind of crude way in which we have it are things like horoscopes. You know, people are very wedded to these, actually. You know, people put them on their Facebook profile as though they are meaningful. You can know your Chinese horoscope as well. There are also more kind of scientific versions of this. All sorts of ways of profiling personality type, such as the Myers-Briggs test, for example. I don't know if you've done those. A lot of companies use these for recruitment. You ask a load of questions, you answer a load of questions, and this is supposed to reveal something about your core personality. And of course, the popular fascination with this is enormous. In magazines like this, you'll see in the bottom left corner, they'll advertise in virtually every issue some kind of personality thing. And if you pick up one of those magazines, it's hard to resist, isn't it? Doing the test, to find what is your learning style, what is your loving style, what is your working style, you know, are you this kind of person or that? So I think that we have a kind of common sense idea that there is a kind of core or essence of ourselves to be discovered, and that this is kind of a permanent truth about ourselves, something that's the same throughout life. Well, that's the idea I want to challenge. And I have to say now, I'll say it a bit later, but I'm not challenging this just because I'm weird. The challenge actually has a very, very long and distinguished history. So look, here's the common sense idea. There is you. You are the individuals you are, and you have this kind of core. Now, in your life, what happens is that you, of course, accumulate different experiences and so forth. So you have memories, and these memories help to create what you are. You have desires, maybe for a cookie, maybe for something that we don't want to talk about at 11 o'clock in the morning in a school. You will have beliefs. This is a number plate from someone in America. I don't know whether this number plate, which says Messiah 1, indicates that the driver believes in the Messiah or that they are the Messiah. Either way, they have beliefs about Messiahs. We have knowledge. We have sensations and experiences as well. It's not just, you know, intellectual things. So this is kind of the common sense model, I think, of what a person is. There is a person who has all the things that make up a life, the experiences. But the suggestion I want to put to you today is that there's something fundamentally wrong with this model. And I can show you what's wrong with one click, which is there isn't actually a you at the heart of all these experiences, right? Strange thought? Well, maybe not. What is there then? Well, clearly there are memories, desires, intentions, sensations, and so forth. But what happens is these things exist, and they're kind of all integrated, they're overlapped, they're connected in various different ways. They're connected partly, perhaps even mainly, because they belong to one body and one brain. But there's also a narrative, a story we tell about ourselves, the experiences we have when we remember past things. We do things because of other things. So what we desire is partly a result of what we believe, and what we remember is also informs what we know. And so really, there are all these things like beliefs, desires, sensations, experiences. They're all related to each other, and that just is you, okay? It's a very sort of, in some ways, it's a small difference from the common sense understanding. In some ways, it's a massive one. It's a shift between thinking of yourself as a thing which has all the experiences of life, and thinking of yourself as simply that collection of all experiences in life. You are the sum of your parts. Now, those parts are also physical parts, of course, brain, bodies, and legs and things, but they aren't so important, actually. You know, if you have a heart transplant, you're still the same person. If you have a memory transplant, are you the same person? If you have a belief transplant, would you be the same person? Now, this idea that what we are, the way to understand ourselves, is as not of some permanent being which has experiences, but is kind of a collection of experiences, might strike you as kind of weird. But actually, I don't think it should be weird. In a way, it's common sense. Because I'll just invite you to think about, by comparison, well, actually think about pretty much anything else in the universe, maybe apart from the very most fundamental forces or powers. Let's take something like water, right? Now, my science isn't very good. We might say something like water has 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, right? We all know that. No one thinks, I hope no one in this room thinks that what that means is there is a thing called water, and attached to it are hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and that's what water is. Of course we don't. We understand very easily, very straightforwardly, that water is nothing more than the hydrogen and oxygen molecules suitably arranged. Everything else in the universe is the same. There's no mystery about my watch, for example. The watch, we say the watch has a face and hands and a mechanism and a battery. But what we really mean is we don't think there is a thing called the watch to which we then attach all these bits. We understand very clearly that you get the parts of the watch, you put them together, and you create a watch. Now, if everything else in the universe is like this, why are we different? Why think of ourselves as somehow not just being a collection of all our parts, but somehow being a separate permanent entity which has those parts? Now, this view is not particularly new, actually. It has quite a long lineage. You find it in Buddhism. You find it in 17th, 18th century philosophy, going through to the current day, people like Locke and Hume. But interestingly, it's also a view you're increasingly being heard reinforced by neuroscience and everything. This is Paul Brox. He's a clinical neuropsychologist. And he says this: we have a deep intuition that there is a core, an essence there, and it's hard to shake off, probably impossible to shake off, I suspect. But it's true that neuroscience shows there is no center in the brain where things do all come together. So when you look at the brain, and you look at how the brain makes possible a sense of self, you find that there isn't a central control spot in the brain. There is no kind of like center where everything happens. There are lots of different processes in the brain, all of which operate in a way quite independently. But it's because of the way that they relate that we get this sense of self. I call it, the term I use, the term in the book is called, I call it the ego trick. But it's a trick in the sense that not, it's like a mechanical trick. It's not that we don't exist. It's just that the trick is to make us feel that inside of us is something more unified than is really there. Now, you might think this is a worrying idea. You might think that if it's true that for each one of us there is no abiding core of self, no permanent essence, does that mean that really the self is an illusion? Does it mean that we really don't exist? There is no real you. Well, a lot of people actually do use this talk of illusion and so forth. These are 3 psychologists: Thomas Metzinger, Bruce Hurd, Susan Blackmore. A lot of these people do talk the language of illusion. The self is an illusion, it's a fiction. But I don't think this is a very helpful way of looking at it. But go back to the watch. The watch isn't an illusion because there's nothing to the watch other than the collection of its parts. In the same way, we're not illusions either. The fact that we are, in some ways, just this very, very complex collection, ordered collection of things does not mean we're not real. And I can give us sort of a very sort of rough metaphor for this. Let's take something like a waterfall. These are the Iguazu Falls in Argentina. Now, if you take something like this, you can appreciate the fact that in lots of ways, there's nothing permanent about this. For one thing, it's always changing. The waters are always carving new channels with changes in tides and the weather. Some things dry up, some things new things are created. Of course, the water that flows through the waterfall is different at every single instance. But it doesn't mean that the Iguazu Falls are an illusion. It doesn't mean that it's not real. What it means is that we have to understand what it is as something which has a history, has certain things that keep it together, but it's a process, it's fluid, it's forever changing. Now that, I think, is a model for understanding ourselves. And I think it's a liberating model, because if you think that you have this fixed permanent essence, which is always the same throughout your life, no matter what, in a sense you're kind of trapped. You have a kind of, you're born with an essence, that's what you are until you die. Maybe after, if you believe in an afterlife, maybe you continue. But if you think of yourself as being, in a way, not a thing as such, but a kind of a process, something that is changing, then I think that's quite liberating, because unlike the waterfalls, we actually have the capacity to channel the direction of our development for ourselves to a certain degree. Now, we've got to be careful here, right? If you watch The X Factor too much, you might buy into this idea that we can all be whatever we want to be. True. I've heard some fantastic musicians this morning, and I am very confident that I could no way be as good as them. I could practice hard and maybe be good, but I don't have that really natural ability. There are limits to what we can achieve. There are limits to what we can make of ourselves, but nevertheless, we do have this capacity to, in a sense, shape ourselves. The true self, as it were then, is not something that is just there for you to discover. You don't sort of look into your soul and find your true self. What you are partly doing, at least, is actually creating your true self. And this, I think, is very, very significant, particularly this kind of stage of life you're at. You'll be aware of the fact, how much have you changed over recent years? If you have any videos of yourself 3 or 4 years ago, you probably feel embarrassed because you don't recognize yourself. So I want to sort of get that message over, that what we need to do is think about ourselves as things that we can shape and channel and change. This is the Buddha again. Well makers lead the water. Fletchers bend the arrow. Carpenters bend a log of wood. Wise people fashion themselves. And that's the idea I want to leave you with, that your true self is not something that you will have to go searching for as a mystery and maybe never ever find. To the extent that you have a true self, it's something that you in part discover, but in part create. And that, I think, is a liberating and exciting prospect. Thank you very much.
All right, thoughts on this? By the way, I don't like the stuff that's mentioned in the videos. There are some things that are good and so on, but not everything in the videos are going to be things that we necessarily agree with from an Islamic perspective, or just in general. And keep in mind that the dates of the videos, like that particular video you just watched, that was from 2011, which is about 10 years ago. So there's a lot of new research that has come up in the meantime. For example, I believe the first video that we watched was, I think, 2016 or 2018, one of those years and stuff. So as more information is discovered by people, then they start adjusting their theories and things like that. So one of the things that he was mentioning, that I don't think I'm ever going to be as good a musician no matter how much I practice. So he was talking about this cap that a person might have, this that there's a need for natural ability and so on. But as we saw in Dr. Carol Dweck's stuff and some other stuff that we looked at, that may not necessarily be the case in the current understanding of neuroscience and how things work, right? There was a lady by the name of Paula Caproni, Dr. Paula Caproni from the University of Michigan. She wrote a book in 2000, and she had a course developed as well in 2017, where she consolidated the research over the years of successful people that were being successful and had great lives and so on, right? And she discussed what were the characteristics of these people. And so one of the main things was that they are constantly putting their effort, focus, deliberate practice in particular goals that they have in mind. And so they're very dynamic people in that sense, that they're always constantly growing. So in this context, it's not a matter of you don't have the abilities, therefore you can't do something. But if you synthesize the new research, you consolidate it, then you're going to find that actually you can go towards certain things. Now, on the other hand, there are certain things where we believe, certain things that we believe in, like for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has certain things mapped out for us. So in those cases, that there are certain boundaries that have been laid out in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already sort of known what we're going to do, has certain paths that are going to open up at a certain time in our lives and stuff, and certain other ones are going to be blocked off because they may not be good for us and so on. So in this context, we know that there are certain things we're not going to achieve based on that, right? Not necessarily because we aren't going to be able to in and of themselves. These goals are not achievable by us, but it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided there are certain things, certain pathways that are better for us. So in that sense, there is a cap, but not in the way that he was talking about it. So just some things I wanted to mention, that just because we're watching these videos doesn't mean that we agree with everything. In the context of improvement, in the context of personalities being fluid and dynamic, those things, they make sense. And Islamically, this is the idea of character development anyways, right? We always try to work on our character. There are certain rules that Islam proposes that we try to adhere to, and we try to adjust our characters, our personalities and dispositions accordingly. But ultimately, these are things that are like very malleable. Now, if we don't focus on those things, we let them go, then it makes sense for them to sort of become a certain way, especially in a particular context. So in this scenario, or in this on this topic, they've said that the scholars have mentioned that the Prophets alayhim salam, all of them, there's a hadith on this actually. The Prophet was asked about this, or he was discussing with the companions, and the discussion was about how the Prophets ﷺ were shepherds of sheep, right? And so the scholars discuss why this was the case, why the Prophets ﷺ throughout were shepherds, and why of sheep specifically, as opposed to, for example, goats or something else, right? And so the discussion went that because a shepherd, again, in practice, a Nabi, a Prophet ﷺ, he's going to be overseeing a group of people. But sheep are different than camels. Camels have this, pride, this arrogance about them, for example, that a person needs to understand. Versus a sheep, or a sheep in general, they need to be taken care of. They need to be kind of overseen and so on. So in this context, the Prophet ﷺ were trained to become a certain kind of person, so that when they actually interact with people, then they're going to be used to the kind of things that they need to do when it comes to being a prophet, and kind of advising people, taking the hits from people, being patient and being forbearing with them, and so on and so on. So their personalities were developed. Likewise, if you're a teacher, some teachers might say this is a teacher, and mean like in a certain context they might start teaching people or so on. So they might be like, this is the teacher, and that's just because this is the context that they've lived, for a while, and so they've developed according to that. If they change their context, they're going to become different, because our brains constantly adapt to the context that we're in. And so some things to keep in mind over here. So in this context, who are you? Who should you be, and why? Now, obviously, these are very deep questions, but I do want you to think about this, because I want us to differentiate from what society might expect from us, what our cultures might expect from us, versus what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us. And sometimes that differentiation is very tough, especially if our context, people in our context are pulling us in a certain direction, but then we have a conflict because we're trying to be somebody else. So who do I become? Do I become, is there a person that I could just completely follow? In that case, who is that person? Or is it that I just need to try to figure out what I should be, because there's all this confusion, because there's all these possibilities and options and stuff? What does it look like? And how do our goals sort of highlight some of the things that we might be? For example, if I have a particular end vision, what does that tell me, or tell anybody about me? And what kind of goals could we have? What kind of visions could we have for ourselves in this context? So just some things to think about. So I would love to hear your feedback. If you don't have feedback, if you need more time to think about it, that's okay. But just anything that comes to you, you can chat, you can put in the chat, or you can, unmute yourself and speak. Whatever you feel comfortable with.
I was just thinking about how this idea of changing through life and how that affects who you are, how that this concept is so important when it comes to relationships, for, let's say, husband and wife, and that if you're not having similar life goals, and if you are not really good with communicating with each other and sharing experiences, then it seems that it's almost natural you would grow apart from each other. Just something that popped into my mind listening to all of this. That having, Islam as the criterion for your day-to-day life, having that common theme would be so critical to maintaining long and healthy relationships.
Yeah, that's a good point over here, because even in the Quran, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does allow divorce, but then he mentions in the context of discussing for husbands their relationship with their wives. So in Surah An-Nisa, there's a verse about how husbands are told that if you find something that you don't like in your wife, then there might be something that's actually good, or there's something that might come out in this relationship that's actually good, right? So it's better. In other words, you might find something that you didn't like, but there's also something that's possibly good. So if you just kind of focus on, like, the way you look at your relationship, the way you kind of focus on, or the things that you focus on, like, this is kind of putting things into perspective. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discouraging the concept of divorce here, and because he's saying, we should focus on kind of like certain things that are prioritized, certain things that are more valuable, but at the same time understand that we can actually communicate and actually have positive relationships and kind of grow in those relationships without having to just sort of just because I don't like this, that I'm not going to be able to work with this other person. In that case, we shouldn't be able to theoretically work with anybody then, because there's bound to be something that I don't like in another person, or something about another person that I have any kind of relationship with, whether it's a family member, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend or whatever. But whatever we like, the set of our likes all together don't need to be present in any one other person entirely. You might get some things, you might not get some things, but at the same time, the idea is communication, making sure that you understand what the boundaries are of the other person, making sure that you respect the other person, you respect whatever the other person needs, and so on. And then if you have this sort of understanding, this relationship, and that's the kind of relationship you would have between two friends, that's the kind of relationship you would have between family members, and you have to have certain relationships with family members because whether you like it or not, they are bound to you. So if you are able to have these kinds of relationship with family members who you don't get to choose, then it makes sense for us to actually be able to do this when it comes to our family members who we get to choose, like spouses and so on, or friends. Now also, one more thing in this is that on the other hand, for wives, they're given some advice when it comes to their husbands, and the ayah concludes and says وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, that reconciliation is better. So I always make this point that for reconciliation to be better, it has to be an option to begin with. If it wasn't an option, then it couldn't have been better, right? If something doesn't exist as an option, you can't say it's better. So it has to be an option to begin with for it to be better, for it to be compared to something else and then be better than the other option. So in this context, we realize that the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Islam, there are a lot of strategies in how to make sure that your relationship constantly grows and develops and so on. There's a course, or there's a group of people that have this course on relationship coaching, right? And in this, they focus a lot on what are some things that you could do in terms of developing your relationship. So the idea is imagine that you start off at level 0 in your relationship. What are some of the things that people can do generally to take their relationship from level 0 higher? In other words, what are some things that can actually help a relationship, any relationship, and what are things that can actually diminish the lower, the kind of lower the levels, or kind of break apart the relationship? And this again applies in any context, any relationship, whether it's friends, whether it's boss and coworker, and employees or whatever, whether it's something in the context of, for example, masjid leadership, for example, versus the people that are attending, whether it's the imams and the congregants and stuff, whether it's a friend, another friend, whatever it is, right? In every context, but also in the context of family dynamics and stuff like that. So there are certain things that you could do to actually build your relationships. The part of that could be for example, focusing on building trust. What are some strategies to help build trust? What are some strategies in terms of respect, building respect, mutual respect between people? There are many different things that you can focus on. So yeah, the idea is that sometimes people think that things are sort of fixed and you just can't change them. I think that to really understand the reality, you would have to sort of say that there are certain things that people choose to not focus on, or choose to believe that they're fixed, and so they end up staying fixed, meaning people don't actually consciously put effort in trying to develop them, right? Whereas there are other people who might say, what, everything is up for grabs in a way where I can constantly improve myself, and I'm going to keep working on myself, and I'm going to try to understand the other person so I can I can respect their boundaries and their needs and stuff. And then the other person does the same way. So then your relationship kind of grows and stuff like that. So that is something that's important. A lot of people who have a growth mindset will always thrive, and they'll always, like, you know, find ways to kind of improve relationships and dynamics. Whereas other people who sort of see things as like rigid and fixed and sort of bounded already, and they don't feel like they have much control, they might even become pessimistic or narcissistic and things like that. And obviously that's not a healthy thing. But just to kind of add on some reflections to what Sister Tara was mentioning. Other thoughts?
The only thing I would add to that is that when growth is occurring, you are not necessarily growing at the same rate as your partner. So you do need to give people time to catch up, and to be sensitive to the fact that you may not be growing at the same rate, but as long as you have the same criterion and the same goals, inshallah, you'll be growing in the same direction, just maybe not at the same rate.
Yeah. And this is a good point, because here's another thing to think about. In a relationship, just because you're going with your backstory, with your history, with whatever defines who you are, right? The fact that you have your own unique set of experiences, you know, knowledge and understandings and whatever else, right? Every other person likewise has their own unique set. So it makes sense for any relationship, for any interaction, for any growth process to look very different for every individual person. Sometimes we like to make things easier by categorizing people and things into, you know, into certain categories and stuff, right? But in reality, if we really want to contextualize, right, every person is unique to their set of experiences. And sometimes that can sound really scary, but you know, when we understand that every person needs their own sort of customized time and attention and focus and so on, then if we understand and appreciate that fact, then it's a lot easier to navigate that, because you know, every person feels unique, as in they feel like they belong, because they're unique and they bring they bring value to the entire dynamic, as opposed to somebody being just like anybody else, and then their worth is sort of diminished because there's already somebody like you, right? So that's an important point. And then the idea that the growth rate is going to be necessarily different in pretty much every context, every situation. I would imagine this would likely be the case in every situation. I can't really think of something off the top of my head where things would be the same. I think, you know, they might seem to be the same, you know, if you look at it, you know, from like a general perspective. But I think if we go deeper, it would actually be different for different people and stuff, because of the subcomponents that might be different. So for example, if we're, you know, trying to memorize Quran, and I'm just using that as an example. So let's say that, you know, we have a goal that we want to memorize Quran, one verse a day. So both husband and wife study the same verse and stuff, right? So they memorize it at the end of the day. But then the implications of that, like how they actually understand it, how much they have to review, for example, how easy it is for them to forget it, or what kind of understanding that they got from it, from their perspective, from their understanding, from their background, from their history and so on, might be very different. And so in that case, the implications for one person might be very different in terms of the growth that they have, because of the understanding, because of the kind of time commitment they have to do to keep that verse memorized, and so on, might be very different across the board. So in that case, that's another example of like pretty much everything is going to have a different rate of growth, and we need to respect and understand that this is just how life is. And once we accept this fact, then again, it makes it a lot easier for us not to sort of project on other people what we have for ourselves unique in terms of processes, in terms of like growth and development. So I'm gonna mute myself because I think I'm speaking too much. So I'm gonna let you guys have this discussion among yourselves more. So what do you guys think? Just reflect on these things a little bit more. Talk a little bit about your struggles and stuff. If you want me to stop the recording because you want to talk about something that is personal, then let me know, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Otherwise, if you feel there are generic things that people can benefit from in terms of discussion and so on, then you can continue each other, or you can mention in the chat. I don't think the chat is in the recordings. It's just the the audio and the whatever is being presented here. ask each other questions too. Like maybe there are other questions that you might be thinking of. Maybe there are other reflections, or maybe you had a question that you've always had in your mind, but it was something that you understood a certain way, but you would like other people's perspectives on it. Again, because that person might bring a unique perspective that you might not be able to get except from that one person.
So I don't know. I'm having like a hard time like digesting everything. But something that like stood out to me from the video we just watched was like when he was joking about like if we looked at like a video of ourselves or a picture of ourselves from like 2, 3, 4 years ago, we would probably say that's embarrassing. And I think that was very relatable. Just because even like for me personally, I could see so much growth in myself within the past just year of like the beginning of COVID. And this time last year, February was like the last normal month of our lives of 2020. So I think about how much that I've grown and how much I've changed. And just I don't know, it gets me thinking a lot about how in the moment, like obviously in February of last year, we weren't expecting like our whole world to change in this way, but in that moment, I don't think I was thinking at all about like self growth or like what are ways that I can improve, but literally being like locked up or in this lockdown and quarantine has kind of forced these questions of like some of the things that you've said, like what drives you and what is your motivation. So I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm still like trying to come to terms with like being very honest with myself and some of the things that were more of like basically like there's always room to improve. So even if you feel stagnant, you kind of have to like take a step back and reevaluate things that are going on. And obviously, there's a lot of like basis for that in Islam, right? On like how we can grow, how we can improve our connection with Allah. So that's just a lot of my thoughts. It's kind of random and not organized, but those are some of the things that I was thinking about.
It's good. I think a lot of people did actually have this deep reflection, or a time for deep reflection, because of the sudden change with like the entire world at one point sort of stopping. Because I don't know if you remember those pictures back when it first started, where the lockdowns were initiated all over the world, and literally like they had pictures of like the entire world in different like major cities, and there were no cars on the street. So it was like a very, very interesting thing. But yeah, so in that case, like everything sort of like it was a very drastic sort of like hard stop, and like okay, then this is the time when people really had to consider things. Say okay, we used to fall, we used to like use our safety nets to fall back on, and so we felt like things are gonna be sort of normalized a certain way and stuff. But then when things didn't go according to a certain way, then we realized how fragile whatever norms that we have set might be. Okay, continue. I kind of put some questions in the chat. Just some things to think about. Some things that might make it overwhelming for us. Like, for example, maybe you're trying to be a certain person. It's really, really difficult for you. Maybe you're struggling because certain people are expecting certain things from you, but you don't feel like you have the tools, or you don't feel like you have the interest in doing those things. Maybe you feel there's something better to do. Maybe you want to do certain things, but maybe you're not ready for them right now. Maybe you want to do multiple things. Think about all those things and see, like, what are some struggles that you might be going through. If do you really understand who you are, who you really want to be? If not, what are some things that are obstacles? What are some things that you feel are opportunities? All of these things. Just kind of brainstorm, talk to each other, try to see where everyone else is, because I'm pretty confident that just because one person, okay, I'm pretty confident that whatever you're struggling with, at least one of the other people in this group has been going through something like that or has experience with that. So when you talk about it, you feel less alone. So in this case, we have some, connection. We can relate to each other, but again, we are still unique in the sense that we have our own unique context and backstories and so on. So we can connect in some ways, and then we can also understand that there are some unique things about us that help us actually feel like we belong into a bigger picture.
So I was just reading through some of the questions, and the one that kind of stood out most was, is it hard to be different and unique? And like right off the bat, I was like, yes, like I can relate to that. There's like a lot of like experiences that have like shaped that that overall for me. It's kind of hard to articulate, but there's like a lot of aspects, whether that's like being like the only Muslim in a setting or minority, or just like in your personality, leadership roles. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to articulate that. If anyone else wanted to like kind of touch on like experiences, or if they felt that like same feeling and how they've dealt with that, I think that'd be like beneficial to hear about from like a different perspective.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. This is my first time joining this class, alhamdulillah. But I just kind of wanted to touch on the question that Yusra highlighted. Like she said, it's kind of hard to articulate for me also. But what I was kind of thinking about was in terms of the video that talked about, personality and how we tend to kind of like confine ourselves instead of kind of grow with our personality in a way, and like the uniqueness in that way. Like I've always been someone who I would just be, I didn't really understand the purpose of personality, like, categorizing someone just as this or like categorizing someone just as that based on just like instances that like just like minutes of like instances or like a couple hours that the person and you just categorize them as an introvert or like an extrovert. It didn't really make sense to me because for me it's just like I'm in a different situation every single time, so you don't know if I'm like this in other settings. So it's like people see you, but I guess it does go into like another like aspect where people see you differently than you kind of see yourself, and like kind of allow yourself to grow in that sense. But like the uniqueness in that sense is not really understood by other people because I feel like they all see you differently than you see yourself, and everyone sees you from a different lens than someone else will. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really hard for me to articulate also. But it is a struggle when you when I try to like explain like certain characteristics of like myself to like other people, and it's like they don't get it because that's not what they've kind of experienced with me. So it's kind of different. They're like, nah, no, this isn't you. And then it's like, it could be me sometimes, but it's just different. I don't know. But that's what I have to say. If you guys have any other input or like discussion.
I think it's a good point that you mentioned, and I think I'm going to let other people, go into this. So that I guess the follow-up question I want to ask everyone else to kind of explore in this concept is, why do people like to classify other people, within certain boxes? Like, why do people feel the need to sort of like have a certain sort of defined set of characteristics that they know a person by? Why is it difficult for them to sort of be okay with the fact that this person might constantly be changing, and that whenever they know of this person, may constantly be changing, and like the person they knew may not be the same person tomorrow in every way, that they might have changed. Why is that difficult? So, just as you're reflecting, maybe you can also think about that. Go ahead.
I think it can be like scary in a sense, as like, I mean, it's kind of generic, but you hear people say that like as humans, change is like something that we're afraid of, or like the unknown. So like categorizing people just makes it easier for us to limit whatever it is that we like perceive or like literally experience. So if someone acts like out of the norm of what we're used to, then we don't know how to deal with that. Or I'm trying to see like how to word this. So because it's a new experience for us, it kind of surpasses like it being about them, and it causes us to have to do some like introspection in a way. Like we have to think about, okay, how do I want to deal with this? Is this something that I see in myself? Where have I kind of experienced this before? So yeah, I think it's just a newer experience, and it's kind of like scary, like if you haven't dealt with that like in the past. So that's something that I was like reflecting on, and I know that I've also dealt with personally. Just those thoughts in general.
Okay, so this is a good reflection. Continue. I also put another question in, or like another comment in the chat box. Maybe that'll help guide the conversation a little bit, at least towards some sort of like understanding and so on.
I haven't seen a new question in the chat, but for me, I feel like it's just a way for people to ascribe like certain behaviors to people, so they can understand why they act a certain way or do certain things or behave in like different ways. So it's just like to kind of differentiate and like ascribe like I guess like a personality that they see fit. And when it doesn't kind of align with their behaviors, or when they go out of those borders, it's like a strange thing, like Yusra kind of said. And it's just like, it makes you kind of want to reevaluate, like, do I know this person? Is this, has this characteristic been there before and I'm just noticing it? Is this part of the, you know, like what I ascribe to this person in a way? And in the chat, it says, well, we don't know what to expect. So certain traits can help others sort of feel like they can make sense of your actions. Yeah, so it can kind of, in that way, like help people make sense of your actions, if it's good or bad, or if it's what they would originally think that you would do. Like when someone hears something about you and they're like, oh, never, that can't be that person, but they don't know that aspect of you in a way. But yeah, I feel like it's just to categorize and like ascribe different personalities and like different behavior that they think that the person would be most likely to carry out or to be like. But yeah.
So the question about like, is it hard to plan when we don't know what to expect, and that can be overwhelming? So for me, that is like one of the major causes of stress for me. If I don't know like what I'm supposed to be doing, like whether that's an assignment or planning for like an event, this happens a lot just because of like organizational issues. But I tend to get like very stressed, and because I don't know what I'm expected of, I add like unnecessary pressure to either like surpass expectations or and that would cause me to like maybe overwhelm myself in terms of like workload or yeah. So I'm trying to think like when I see a question like that, why is it overwhelming? I think it just goes back to, you know, when we don't know what to expect, we don't know. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I think it just goes back to like when we don't know what to expect, we don't really know how to deal with it. And then you're asking like what's the best or at least better way to navigate this? I don't really know, to be honest. I feel like for me, something that helps is just like talking it out, whether the person knows how to help or not. More times, like more often than not, someone might have like an experience that might be helpful in like dealing with it, and it might not be like the answer that I need in the moment, but there are always things that you can draw from, you know, maybe people who've been in your position before, or just know about a type of like situation that you're in. So that's something that I do. I don't really know like what else or what are like other good ways to navigate that. So I'd also like to hear like what other people do as well.
What was the question specifically? Navigate what?
Is this for me?
Yes.
Okay. So pretty much everything that preceded it. Overall, the fact, for example, on the one hand, so this is right after that question. On the one hand, we try to box people to make it easier for us to navigate around them. Meaning, if I sort of expect that this person is going to be like this, and generally they might be like this, you know, because they might have a trend, or they might be like sort of subconsciously doing certain things because they've developed a pattern, because they're in a particular context for a long time, and so on. So on the one hand, we try to box people to make it easier for us to navigate around them, meaning interact with them and so on. But because we can plan things, we can expect certain things and stuff, right? Versus on the other hand, people actually, in fact, capital T truth, do change. And this is just a constant thing that happens in life and stuff, right? And if we don't accommodate that in a good way, then we could actually be unjust towards those people. So on the one hand, we want to box people because it's easier for us to navigate them, right? But on the other hand, people are constantly changing, so our boxing may actually need adjustment constantly, right? But that also poses, you know, like a difficult situation for us, because then in that case, you know, we can't really plan because every second something could be changing. So how do we like practically balance the two things?
I think that is actually a challenge, but it is human nature. I believe that we're limited in our minds, and like even if you see an animal that you've never seen before, for instance, you're out in the forest or something, and you see an animal, and you're looking at it, and you're trying to figure out, is that some kind of a dog, or is that some kind of a bear, or is that some kind of a cat? You know, whatever the thing is, and you're just trying to categorize it in your mind so that maybe you can understand the risk balance or something. So even when we're seeing even a plant, you know, oh, does it have 3 leaves? Does it have a red stem? Could it be poison ivy? You know, is it, you know, we're just trying to categorize things. For some reason, it seems to be human nature. So, but of course you can't treat people the same way you would treat an animal or a plant. You know, they deserve so much more. So I think always thinking positively, like having that positive, that first initial impression be positive, and then trying to get to know people that you're having to, that either you're working with, or obviously if it's family or friends, you do get to know them. But if it's somebody you have to work with, or a coworker, student, or whatever your situation is, then getting to know people and having positive thoughts about them, that will give you the advantage, so that you're not just putting them in a box which has so many stereotypes attached to it. So you, I see your question there. A system and Islam to help us navigate this dilemma. I mean, yes, we have social constructs, and maybe general categorization with a mental note that is flexible, malleable, and specific should be left open. Yes, I mean, we should realize that people are changing. I think, honestly, in this life, we're all so busy with our own selves and our own issues and our own activities that sometimes we fail to give people their rights as far as time and interest. So maybe if we are a bit better in those regards, put down the phone and actually talk to people, spend time with people, that'll help. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, so I guess another question here, just kind of all in all, and maybe we can conclude with this inshallah. So practical, implications of this dilemma, essentially, right? And how does Islam provide a solution to that? Because that's obviously something that we want to make sure that we utilize, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew our dilemmas and He knew our context, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us solutions accordingly, right? Or whatever best fits the context. So in this context, some of the parameters are that we don't know every detail about a person's life. We don't know the development that's happening over time for them. We don't know their specific unique circumstances that are constantly helping them evolve or possibly stay the same in particular aspects of their life, right? On the other hand, we need to accept this because it's happening. So we want to balance this like this. We have this unknown, which makes it harder for us to actually interact with them oftentimes, because we wouldn't know if we just left everything unknown. We wouldn't know how to navigate anything. We wouldn't feel like we're ready to handle certain things. So functionally, we need to sort of make some assumptions. But then the very fact that we're making assumptions, we could probably tell ourselves, say, okay, mentally, I can have a note and say, I don't know if this is the right thing or the best thing and stuff, so I'm open to being wrong. But what I want to do first is that I should probably do a consultation with other people, so istishara. And then after that, I should also make istikhara, consulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this case. And then I can plan according to this. So now I have certain assumptions. I did, consultation, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide me. Now, based on these assumptions that I had, based on this counsel that I had, based on this dua that I made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I can have a plan in place and I can pursue it. And then if my plan ends up being wrong, I apologize and I say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this and stuff, but this is a good opportunity for me to grow and learn. And then I continue according to that. And then, a specific aspect of this could be, for example, let's say a person has been known to be, for lack of a better word, a delinquent, or a person who is very problematic, as this person may be described. And maybe this person is committing a lot of sins, maybe they do all these bad things and stuff, right? But then us, we start noticing patterns. So we say, okay, well, we box this person into this box of, okay, this person is going to be like unreliable, this person is going to cause troubles and stuff, and so on and so on, right? So now there's a unique opportunity where this person actually feels like, you know what, I do need to change this stuff. I need to become a different person. I am doing these things and stuff that are bad. So this time, this person actually tries their best to make things work out in a good way. So they actually try to break their habit or their trend or their pattern or whatever, right? And they step out of line, right? Meaning out of whatever it was sort of like, whatever the box that they were boxed in, they actually step out of that. And then they interact with the person, with us, right? But we sort of still have this sort of mental schema or mental framework that this person needs to be within. And so we actually treat them according to that. So in this case, we might actually do an injustice, because where this person was actually trying to get better, we didn't let them because of our categorization, our fixed categorization, right? Instead of being malleable or flexible. So in this case, to practically navigate this possibility, what we would do, for example, Islamically, is say that every person who shows some sign of growth or development, we always keep that door open. We always keep that possibility open, and we are ready to admit when we made a mistake. So if I, for example, treat this person in a certain way, and we see that this person's might have got hurt or something like that, then we apologize and we say, hey, I don't know if you actually meant this or not, just because of the patterns and stuff, it seemed like this, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm really sorry. I know that there has been a trend, but trends are not what define a person for life. They're not permanent. They can be broken. And so if you really did, this, whatever, then I want to apologize and stuff. And, I hope that I can help facilitate more of this new behavior or new, drive that you have. And I've personally noticed this, in terms of youth. There are certain people who are, constantly getting in trouble, but I had to keep this door open for them all the time. So I have a story of this one person, in one of our youth programs. He was always having difficulty with his mom. He was always having this conflict and things like that, right? And then, and he was always getting in trouble in our programs and stuff. He was talking, he wasn't really paying attention and so on, right? But then, and so he was always getting in trouble, and we would have to sort of tell him, okay, can you, for example, I would say, here, can you go in this area right here when you're ready to come back and join us and stuff, when you feel safe to come back or whatever, and not, and be following the rules and stuff, right? Then you can come back whenever you want to. So that way, I just kind of help the person sort of get out of that group, find their personal time or whatever. Then they come back whenever they're ready and stuff. So I don't get upset at that person. I'm not yelling at them or whatever. I just ask them to step outside. When they feel ready to join us again, they can join us again, and that's it. And so even if a person and when the rest of the group might sort of kind of mix, they might say something, or they might say something negative, or they might act a certain way that implies that they're looking down on this person. I just let them know that this is not, they shouldn't do that, because this person may just need some time and to reflect, and then they can come back, and that's it. And that's okay. I'm not upset at that person. I just need this person to maybe this person just needs that time, so I want to respect that. So this is how I frame it, even though this person constantly does this and stuff like that. So one day, we were having we were we were transitioning from one activity to another, and this person came to me and they said why do you always get me in trouble and stuff, why am I always getting in trouble and stuff, why aren't these people getting in trouble, and so on, right? So then I sat down with him, and I told him that I really believe that he has so much potential, and I think that he's going to be able to do all these things and stuff. And I said for me, I think that you can do all these things and stuff, and I think that you have that potential, and I want to help you, and I have great hopes for you and stuff like that, some things like that, right? And subhanallah, I don't know what happened in his mind. From that point onwards, and I'm not kidding, because other people that were other program organizers or counselors and stuff, right? They also can tell you the same thing, right? From that point onwards, from that day, from that moment, in fact, that conversation onwards, he just became a different person. And I don't know how to describe it other than that. He just became an entirely different person. And then he went on to, he just completely stopped talking. He respected all the rules, because I also mentioned that he can potentially become a role model and things like that. And I think he's a great person and so on, barakallah fi, and so on, right? So subhanallah, he became just a completely different person. And it came to the point that he became the model, the model person that you would have, that you would tell the people to be like. This is the guy who had literally a 180 after one single conversation that I remember. Still, it was actually at the IR gym, and we were in the gym and we were talking. So anyways, now this happened, and alhamdulillah, this person ended up deciding that he wanted to memorize Quran and stuff. So he ended up memorizing the entire Quran, barakallah fi, and everything. It just pretty much his life just flipped in one conversation. But the idea was that even though he had this pattern in history, what I decided to do is I said, it's okay, because that doesn't mean that this person is going to stay like this. And I left the door open for him to change, and for me to accept that change, and for me to encourage that change, afterwards, bi'idhnillah. And so, subhanallah, he ended up becoming this person right here. Yeah. So this is something that, that I wanted to address here. So how do we function where we can still follow trends so other people don't keep getting impacted. For example, if this person had this constant negative behavior pattern, so we still have to account for other people that are involved, because during the times when he's showing these negative behaviors, he's impacting other people negatively, and a lot of people are getting impacted. So how do we account for that while at the same time leaving the door open for this person to possibly have a transformation, right? So in terms of planning, in terms of strategies, because of the trend that he's typically like this, we might have to sort of consistently put him, in a certain area, not let him sit next to certain people and stuff and so on. So this is our planning, right? But at the same time, accommodating the possibility of change. And, in the context of working with people more or making certain decisions, you can also make istishara. Like I would discuss with the counselors and stuff how to interact with this person, and making istikhara is another thing. So for example, in like my cases, like if it comes to ruqya or it comes to like other kind of counseling or whatever and stuff, or Islamic counseling or coaching or whatever and stuff, oftentimes, like multiple times during the actual the duration of our sessions and stuff, meaning like over the course of some time, I would make I'll make istikhara to constantly kind of get consultation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, like I would have a plan, I have a strategy, and then I would also need to connect, because like maybe like a new thought needs to come in my mind, because whatever I thought based on my limited understanding of this person's scenario and so on, it may not be the best one. So I need like constant guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm ready to sort of abandon my plan if something better shows up, right? If I have this mindset, then I don't feel stressed, I don't feel overwhelmed. To answer Yusra's question, I don't feel stressed out anymore, I don't feel overwhelmed, I don't feel like things are not in my control. In fact, when I let go of control and I relinquish that control and I let it go and I let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have that full control, because he has that full control and he's better at planning than me, and he has more information and more knowledge and more wisdom and more love and more care and stuff for me and everyone else than I do, right? Then in that case, like I actually feel more content, and I feel like more relieved, and I feel less overwhelmed, and I feel like my head is sort of clear. I have less stress, less burden to bear and stuff like that. Maybe that kind of helps in terms of like helping address these issues of conformity versus non-conformity, the implications of that in practical life and so on, and how we can use that in terms of interactions with people, in our relationships, different dynamics that we might see ourselves in, just working with people overall, but also kind of understanding who we are, what are our limitations, and kind of accepting them and kind of growing from there. I did read the messages in the chat, by the way. I was reading them as I was going. So yes, So maybe some of you guys have actually personally witnessed these things that I was mentioning. So how can we use that as a strategy? How can that be a strategy where the strategy actually accounts for not having control, not having all the details and stuff, right? How could that be part of a strategy where the strategy is actually related to uncertainty? It's built off of uncertainty, sort of, you can say, right? How can that actually be a useful strategy here? Just some things to reflect on. And if you have more comments, continue having the discussion. Otherwise, we can end whenever you guys want to end, inshallah.
So you were talking about like letting go and kind of like not taking it.
Yusra, we can't hear you. Your mic is super low.
Oh, okay. Is it better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I was gonna ask, like, where's the line between preparing for like the unknown / like the future and letting Allah's decree kind of guide your life in a sense? Because you were talking about like letting go and kind of trying not to control things that you obviously like can't. So I'm trying to like understand just the line. So to what extent do you prepare for like your future? That's like a very broad and obviously unknown and subjective thing. So
Would you mind restating the question?
yeah, so my question is basically like, where is the line between preparing for your future and letting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree kind of guide your life. So at what point do you like let go? Yeah, especially like when it comes to like unknown things. So just like thinking about your future in a broad sense and all of the unknown things that are supposed to like come in your life. That's kind of what I'm just thinking about.
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people ask the same question, but we should have our goals, we should have our plans, but we should also be fully cognizant of the fact that, you know, we plan, but Allah has His plan. And so we should be of the mindset that when something doesn't go our way, or when it appears that Allah is guiding us in a different direction, that, you know, we can change, we can roll. I don't want to say roll with the punches because they're not punches, but you know, just we can change our direction and not get too stressed out about it. So I think that some people go they can go to extremes, where one extreme is, oh, I'm just going to see what happens. You know, my parents think I should study this, and sure, whatever, you know, and then just go with that direction. Or there's the other extreme of getting very upset when things don't go their way, and then they become depressed or angry. Or so it is sort of a middle path, I would say. So you would have your plans, but then be open to the fact that things may not go exactly the way that you have planned it. And obviously when you do istikhara, it gives you the confidence to know that Allah is in control of your plans or of the results. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I've tried to like actualize this like in like whatever happens, especially the istikhara.
Yeah. So when you're making goals, sometimes it can be hard, especially when people want you to think like 5 years, 10 years down the road. But if you come up with sort of that 5-year or 10-year goal, but you break it down into smaller goals that will get you step by step, and then you can adjust your big goal down the road as needed based on the actuality of how things are going. So sort of that accounting on how you're doing on your goals. And if you feel, and if you look at like maybe a smaller goal didn't succeed, then it's a little bit easier to make those course corrections than if you have, you know, if you're just focused on the total end goal.
That was really helpful. I think I've been like trying to like come to terms with that whole like question, because of the fact that like I'm in a place where I have to like, where I'm trying to see like how do I word this. Basically, I'm trying to like figure out where's the line so I'm not overstepping like planning, and like is a backup plan like always necessary, and like as a Muslim, like how do you like tackle things, like because we know obviously like when we choose or make a plan that, you know, and you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His guidance and it doesn't go that way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to replace it with something better. So I was just trying to reconcile like those aspects. So that helped bring some clarity.
Yeah, sometimes it's important to have that backup plan. For instance, like me right now, I don't have an income, but I have a few things that are sort of brewing. So it's important that I have these goals, I have these plans, but it's also important that I have some backup plans so they don't, as they say, put your eggs all in one basket. So I think like in that case, but if it's something like marriage, you know, if you have one proposal, you consider one proposal. You don't think about, well, there's somebody else, or this other person may ask for me. You know, you are thinking about, so there are different situations where you would have different backup plans. So it is sort of situation specific. Yeah. And if you have backup plans, it doesn't hurt, because if your original plan goes through, then that was Allah's plan. If the original plan doesn't go through, then your backup plan may be the plan that Allah had for you. So I think trying to keep flexible and accepting His decree. Yeah.
And just another note on this, if you had a backup plan and you had your original plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the goal that you're seeking is actually good for you, but He knew also that the plan that you had and the backup plan were not good for you to get to that end goal, then neither of those are going to work, and maybe another route is going to open up, right? And in that case, that's the route you're going to end up taking for the same end goal. If your end goal is not good, then like none of the paths to it are going to open up, right? And then another thing is going to open up that's going to like help you change your mind to a different end goal, right? So this is the idea of sort of constant evaluation, sort of constant updating, and that's okay, because you know when we say ihdina siratal mustaqim every day, multiple times, you know, why is it that we are already guided, and that's why we're praying, and that's why we're reciting Fatiha in the prayer itself? Why do we still say ihdina siratal mustaqim, right? So in the discussion you'll see of this ayah, you'll see that like the discussion goes about like how we're guided today, but that doesn't guarantee that we're going to be guided tomorrow. So you keep asking for guidance, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to keep guiding you every step of the way as you go forward. So understanding that this is like something that's like, we need guidance every step of the way. We need to constantly update our plans and adjust according to you know the things that we realize. That's a very healthy thing to do. In fact, this is how we're supposed to do things. This is how we should sort of get used to planning. But I think sometimes in the context that we live in, we might have certain societal expectations about the opposite of that, right? We might sort of like, people might just tell you like, you have to stick to one thing and you have to go all the way out and stuff like that. No matter what happens and stuff, you just have to keep going. But that's not really how things work in Islam, right? There are so many different possibilities, so many things that could happen. And because there's so many, and we don't necessarily have a guarantee of which one is specifically good for us, that's why we need to constantly consult Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's okay. We don't need to have full control of everything in our life, because we don't know when we're going to die either, right? And we don't have control over when our, like for example, where we're going to get our next meal. We might think that we do, but there's so many things that could go wrong. Maybe we're driving to a restaurant and then there's a traffic jam and then something like that, and then like maybe there's the store like closes for some reason or whatever, and we don't get to get the meal. So that can happen too. So there's many different things to understand. Like sometimes things are going to go according to our plans, sometimes they're not. But just because they didn't go according to our plans is not necessarily a reflection on who we are. It doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't have a plan, but it just means that we should submit to the reality that we are not the ones in control of our lives overall, in the sense that like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one overseeing every affair and stuff like that, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to facilitate for us what's good. So we need to understand that, and if we accept that, then we're not stressed anymore, because we understand that not all the burden of our choices, or the decisions that we're making and stuff is necessarily on us, if we let it be on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like not the burden be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but like if we sort of let go and say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I need your help, can you guide me? And then you do your part of planning, research and consultation and so on, but then you sort of say, okay, I have a plan, let me try it out. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows you like something better. You say, okay, I'm ready to take that new thing and stuff like that, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't make me a weak person to constantly shuffle my my plans and stuff like that, because I would rather have a better plan than the one I'm using. The Prophet ﷺ would always give up something that he was doing if he found something better than that. So we could do something like that too. And if we accept that, then we feel more relieved. We're not stressed out about the next 10 years of what's going to happen in our life, the next 50 years and stuff about, like, you know, our careers, our family, and all that stuff. We're going to be living and stuff, all that. We're not really stressed out about that because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to guide us. We did our part. We did whatever consultation we needed to do. And then we could just sort of like rest and say, okay, I did my part. Now it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's going to guide me all the way out. When Musa alayhi salam was standing in front of the water, right? There's the body of water, the sea or whatever, and the people were coming behind him, and then there's like this water in front of him, and now he has to protect all these people and stuff. That's the sort of the scenario that we might find ourselves in. So much is banking on our decision, right? And we feel sort of boxed in. We feel like there's like a rock in a hard place that we're sort of trapped in between, and our decision is going to impact so many different people. So we feel like we're stuck here. But see, Musa alayhi salam did exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to do. He got the people, he escaped at nighttime, and he took the people, and now they're at the place where they need to be. So then when somebody asked him, are you sure this is the place that you're supposed to be? And he says, like, you know, and like he says that, you know, of course, this, like, inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdi, like, definitely, verily, like, for sure, without a shred of doubt, my Lord is with me and He's gonna guide me. And that's it. I've done my part. I know I can see the enemy behind me. I know that I'm trapped, you know, there's an ocean in front of me or a sea in front of me. And I know this burden of responsibility of all these people that I had to protect is on me. But I also know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to leave me alone because I did what He told me to do. I did my part. Maybe that can make the, you know, decision-making process a little bit easier.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Okay, if there are no other points or comments at the moment, we will go ahead and close, inshallah. And again, we can definitely continue these conversations next time. We can do that in the check-in portion, for example. And then, or if you would like to discuss this offline, then you can just let me know. You know, you can connect with us, inshallah. You can direct me. You can message me directly. You can email us. Sister Tara can give us the email address for wherever it's, you know, best for us to email. Or you can, like, if you want to reach me directly, that's any of those routes, inshallah, are open. And other than that, inshallah, I just want you guys to think about these things. The idea is to learn more about capital T truth or reality and submit to it, bi'idhnillah, and not sort of try to have a defined reality, or like not have a reality that we define and try to conform to, and then we become stressed because we are not designed for the realities that we design, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed the reality that's suitable for us. Or if you want to say other way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us, designed us to be suitable for the reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed. So it goes like that. And that makes it a lot easier for us to work. So we just have to understand what that reality looks like, and that's like being a little bit more, and then going from there. Barakallahu feekum. So Cynthia just joined. If you have any last minute comments.
Wow, I am shocked. You all are still going? I did a whole entire workout in between.
Barakallahu feekum. So we were having just some discussions about certain like topics, and maybe you guys can connect afterwards to see if you guys have any like shared reflections, or maybe some things that you guys can benefit from, and maybe some things that you guys want to have a discussion about next time, and then we'll start off next time with that, inshallah.
Did everyone answer the last question?
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك